This is Art Viewing Adventures. I'm Rodney Paul. I'm joined by my good friends, Dragana, Monson, and Nick Despta, who are museum guides at a museum that's known for having artwork that doesn't have a title. So we often call it the San Francisco Unnamed Museum of Art, or SFMOMA, because they're a little shy. They don't like us actually mentioning them by name. And we are brought to you by the Community Living Campaign. And Nikki, why don't you tell us about CLC?
Thank you, Rodney. Great. Hi, everybody. It's a beautiful day out. Glad we're all here together. These events are always a learning experience, and they're friendly and they're informative. And I'm just glad you're here with us and with Paco. So the Community Living Campaign, we're a nonprofit in San Francisco. We are here to advocate for seniors and for people with disabilities, and we provide information, advocacy, and also entertainment and Zoom programming. We've got a writing group, and we've got an art program or two. We have today, following the program today at 2:30, we have Art with Elders. 4 o'clock, we got Qigong, which is Chinese yoga. And then tonight at 6, we've got a really big following for Richie Unterberger, who's featuring the story of Roy Orbison tonight. And he's our master of rock and roll. I mean, Richie knows every detail, has so many photographs and documents about the history of rock and roll. And he's been with us for several years. So that might interest you. I'll put our email address, not our email address, our web address in the chat if you want to look at more of our information. And then Rodney is here twice a month. And we continue doing more and more art programs. So it's been a real eye opener for me. It's expanded my world, and I'm happy you're all here. So thank you. Take it away, Rodney.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki.
It's a very big day for me, Nick and Rodney.
It's a big day for Paco. Why would that be? You've got a big dog behind you, so maybe is that why?
Yes, all of the activities from CLC.
Lots of activities.
Program and Rich.
Yeah, Richie's program on Roy Orbison tonight sounds great, but we are going to talk about art, and specifically an exhibition that is currently at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art on Oxman Architects. And I'm joined, I'll say it again, by my good friends Dragana, Monson, and Nick Despta, who are local museum guides. And I believe you guys visited this exhibition together. Am I right, Nick?
Yes, we did. Yeah. Along with about a half a dozen other guides over 2 different sessions. You know, it's curious, these objects are placed in a museum and we tend to look at them as art, but I think at the end of this session, you may be more inclined to see them as prototypes or proof of concepts, because what the Oxman and the team that she's led are interested in are the material properties of objects and how our built environment can be reconsidered in terms of those properties and how things would look differently if we did so.
And Nick, you're going to go ahead and share some slides, I think. Is this a good time to do that?
Yep.
Yeah, and we've been talking about kind of the life of objects. That was something we were talking about as some of you joined. And I believe these architects are really thinking about that. Like, what do we do with, you know, I had this little house key that is actually no longer useful, and thinking about where would this thing be in 100 years? Because, you know, it could just sit around or fall or something, or it could get recycled. And I think these architects think about stuff like that.
Another thing is to use materials that can be recycled. For example, making concrete. Now, concrete is responsible for about 8% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, which is 3 times more than commercial aviation. If we can, instead of throwing the broken concrete into landfill, grind it up and use it as aggregate for new concrete, then we save the mining, the quarrying of limestone, the transport of that material to the job site, which itself has an enormous carbon footprint.
And there are efforts to do that. We are architects and contractors are awarded, if you want, if they attempt to do that. So
Yeah, and Dragana, I should point out you are an architect.
I am.
So
But I must say that the concept that we will be talking about and these prototypes that we will be talking about are rather futuristic, if you want. And that's what Neri Oxman's goal is, to create something. I think she said somewhere, to create a message in a bottle that when 50 years from now or wherever somebody sees these prototypes, they will understand what we were thinking about at this point in time and hopefully get some ideas to continue developing these ideas.
So good. Sounds like some pretty heady stuff we're going to throw at you guys today. So, it's not just art to be seen for its beauty, but art that's really making us think about where we are now and where we hope to be as a society in the future.
That's correct.
So, are you going to share, Nick?
Ready to share slides?
Yes, go for it, Nick.
Okay, here we are. You all see that?
No, not yet, but we will.
There we go.
Okay. Before I get started, take a look at that image. What does it suggest to you?
Looks to me like something like a leaf or some sort of plant, maybe some lettuce.
Okay, we're going to find out in a few minutes. Any other thoughts about what we're looking at there?
It looks like a leaf, apparently.
Leaf.
Like the white,
Like a leaf?
like a dragon leaf.
Okay. So this is a piece by, there we go. This is a piece by Neri Oxman. Let me catch up there. She's an American-Israeli designer. She's a professor at MIT. She leads a group called the Mediated Matter Research Group. She's got degrees in architecture and planning and design and computation, and you'll see all of those qualities are involved in the production of these objects. She's trained in medical science. And this is a nice quote she has. I believe in the balance between dreaming and building.
I will add, Nick,
Yeah.
maybe because seeing this gorgeous picture of her, people are wondering, well, how old is this woman? She looks so beautiful and so smart at the same time. She's 46. I just checked. She's 46 and she became mother a couple of years ago. And so she's managing to do it all, apparently. And she's at this moment, I think she left MIT and now she's starting her own company in New York City. That's the latest that I read about her, that is going to continue doing this research into all these prototype, all these ideas and materials that she started at MIT.
I have to say, I love this image of her. It could almost be kind of a fascinating portrait in an art gallery.
Yep.
And we'll see that object behind her in a separate slide in a moment. She has suggested an idea called material ecology. And what she's interested in is exploring and expressing the interrelatedness between what we build, what can be grown, in other words, by nature or by natural processes, and how we can augment or add to built objects and environments with natural processes. So the top object, it looks like honeycomb, but it's got a strange shape. And we'll learn more in a few minutes about why it is so. The bottom object is inspired by honeycomb. These are, you see cells, but they have a strange shape as well. They don't have the regular hexagon quality of honeycomb. She asks two very interesting questions. Why do we honor history and loved ones with permanent monuments? Which sort of begs the question, well, what's an impermanent monument? You can think about those monuments that are coming down of Confederate generals right now in the last year as being pretty impermanent, though for a different reason. The other question she asked that we thought was really interesting is, how can humans collaborate with other species to create new objects, new structures without depleting natural resources. She uses the term co-fabrication. So, Dragana, can you tell us what we're seeing here?
Yes, I certainly will tell you a little bit about it. I mean, it is hard when you look at this. It's almost hard to decide what am I looking at, right? How big is this thing? Even though we have a context of the museum, because this is photo from the museum, but I will tell you that this object is about 15 feet high. It is what Neri Oxman calls a aguajoya pavilion. It is, if you try to get into this space, there is an opening. You could get in, and probably one person can certainly fit into it. So what is this? Why did she do that? What is the idea behind it?
It's a pupae.
It's, what did you say?
I think the word P-U-P-A-E, it's what a butterfly matures in, or a caterpillar.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's a great thought.
So, but the big one in this case, right?
So one for humans.
One for humans. Well, the idea behind this is, we mentioned actually in talking before about the plastic, and I found somewhere that 300 million tons of plastic are produced every year, and less than 1/10 is actually recycled. So you can imagine that the rest of it ends up where? Ends up in the landfills or in our oceans, and fishes eat them, and eventually we eat them too, all that plastic. So what Oxman and her team were looking is to find a biodegradable alternative to plastic. And to do that, they figured out, they looked into the plant and shrimp-made materials. Here on the slide, we have some of the materials that were used to create this. Cellulose, pectin, vegetable glycerin, turmeric, all kinds of stuff, right? That the team ground and mixed with water to create kind of paste. And then a robotic arms, because what they do is they use these 3D printers or robotic kind of manufacturing machines, if you want, to create this pavilion, which once they create the base, it kind of slowly grows, and once exposed to the oxygen, that the material actually solidifies and becomes what we see. So we were kind of guessing, looking at it, kind of looks like a leaf. Would you go back, Nick, before we get to this slide? Because I want to kind of talk about what they are actually doing. So they are creating material that has different properties, different thicknesses, abilities to take different loads, also material that could be transparent or opaque. So it has all these various properties that allows the pavilion to be used and to be structurally sound, albeit with the help of the structure itself, which in this case is made out of polymer. Now, but the main idea behind it, and now we can go to the next slide, is that this material is actually, as I mentioned, biodegradable, and can, if exposed to the weather, to rain, it can actually dissolve and go down into soil, become a feed the little fungi or some bacteria in a soil. So basically what they're doing, they're creating this cycle, right? From the plant into the material that we use to shelter, back down into soil. So that is what that question about why are we creating a permanent monuments, and can we do something that will honor and the material itself, and at the same time not become a permanent object. And because they're able to create the this pavilion on a scale that they are able to, we can easily see something like this being used to create, let's say, tent for a refugee. You can see them, you know, all these pavilions line up for a while until the refugees are able to find a safe haven, and then these would be left to deteriorate and decompose into the soil and not leave any permanent mark on the ground. So kind of fuel the regrowth is, I think, the best way to describe this.
That's a good lead to another piece that
Oh, Nick,
this is a
you may have broken up a little bit, Nick. Why don't you repeat what you just said?
okay. We're talking about the deterioration of objects. What about the deterioration of our own bodies? And this piece called Lazarus addresses that. Here she's created a death mask. It's designed, she says, to contain the wearer's last breath. It approaches the resolution of the physical phenomenon. So what is the physical phenomenon that it's designed to capture? That is the act of breathing itself. So this is a photograph from her website that shows the path and the area covered by our breath as we breathe through our nose and our mouth. And it's a heat map. So where there is more breath, the skin is warmer. The object in number C, in letter C, lower left, is a in which color has been infused and it has moved through liquid fluid dynamics to give this appearance again, and that is the path of the breath over the area of the face. Because it creates a unique artifact that is perfectly customized to fit the wearer and her last breath. Well, there's certainly a conceit here. I mean, who could imagine having some kind of technology brought to your deathbed so it could capture your last breath? I don't think this is a practical product idea so much as it is an expression of the way we interact with the environment and the possibility that our breath can be captured and is part of and can be referenced within an object. By the way, this is acrylic. This is not going to deteriorate anytime within a century if you put it into the ground.
And it's not something you're going to be able to enjoy yourself. You will just die.
Although here's a death mask, and you could see this child, the death mask of her mother or her father. Why do we honor history and loved ones with permanent monuments? Oxman asks.
And I think it's because our lives are impermanent and we are seeking some way to overcome that impermanence, right?
I think that's so. I think we want to enrich the idea of immortality.
I like
This-
cemeteries for that reason, because there are these monuments to people's effort to do that. But I think that Neri Oxman would challenge us and say, well, is that the best way of doing it? You know, creating like these stones that are not going to go anywhere, and eventually people long after us are going to have to deal with them.
That's right. And they claim an awful lot of it.
Go ahead, Dragana.
I read somewhere that actually they're injecting some of the living organism into these masks, right? and to create to continue life by using that breath and formation of the breath. Is that how you understood that?
I don't remember reading it. It's certainly possible.
Yeah, that's what I read. That's where the color comes from. Now this injecting this live, whether it's bacteria, I think E. coli actually, bacteria, and to get the color into the mask.
So it can continue to change after it's been created.
Correct. Continue the life cycle.
Uh-huh.
I think idea behind it. So incorporating microorganism into the design.
Here is another mask. This one is pretty cool. She calls a muscle texture mask. Popular person, that's the singer Bjork. And as Bjork would sing, the mask, which is held very close to the face, would move back and forth and make visible the breathing and the articulation of her lips and her cheeks and her throat.
And apparently idea came from her, right? That she's the one who requested them to create this for her for her concerts.
So is there video of her singing using this mask?
I have not seen.
I haven't seen it. We visited the website. By the way, for anyone who's very interested in this, I do encourage you to visit Oxman's website because they have some wonderful videos. This show right here will be all stills. I'm going to move on now, make sure we get through this. Oxman is very interested in the skins of materials, the shells, and one of the concepts she brings to her work is that of monocoque. Monocoque simply means that the external skin of an object carries all of the structural load. Think of an egg, as opposed to having a lot of interior structural members. And of course, another example of that is an insect. The exoskeleton of an insect is a rigid outside shell. Everything inside is soft. So she's interested in how do we make these shells. One way is by having this kind of network or this fabric in which the thickness and the size of each shell reflects the amount of stress or strain on that part of the structure. On the bottom, we see a shell. It reminds me of a shark's egg, if you've ever seen that, the egg sac for a shark. The larger cells presumably carry less of a load than the ones like in the right-hand side of the structure. They get very small, tight, and close together, where the structure, the shell, the skin has to carry more of a load and go through more of a twist. So the surface pressure corresponds to the thickness and the distribution of these cells. So there's a word for that. I didn't know this. It's called a Voronoi pattern. So a little bit about a Voronoi pattern. Polygons, and if you consider that each polygon or shape has a central point, call that the seed. Everything inside a cell is closer to that seed than any other seed. A good way to think about this is I went to Trader Joe's this morning and I decided to go to the one in Pinole because it's actually a little closer than the one in El Cerrito. If you take all of the people in my area, and you see which one goes to the one in El Cerrito versus Pinole, you could draw a boundary line. These go to El Cerrito, those people go to Pinole. So that boundary line is the wall of the cell. And these kind of patterns are actually reflecting efficiency. It's shorter for me to drive here than there. The nearest path, the shortest path, the tightest fit. I was surprised and actually very delighted to discover that a British physician who discovered the source of a cholera epidemic in 1854 did so by figuring out that the cholera contamination was coming from a particular water pump, the water pumps that are in the streets in London, and that everybody he could plot the homes of the people who had contracted cholera and found that the central point for them was this particular water pump. You may know the rest of the story. He removed the handles from water pumps around which people had high incidence of cholera, and the epidemic went away, diminished. So this particular gift that you're seeing, this animated image, comes from a Wikipedia article. And if you want more detail, just look up Voronoi Pattern and you'll find it there. To move on, Co-Fabrication Systems, and Dragana is going to tell us a little about that.
I will just do very, very briefly. So what we see here on top, we see a honeycomb technique, but it looks different than your typical one. You see how honeybees create the honey in the rectangular form. Here, Oxman and her team gave the bees kind of more organic, if you want, base on which they worked and created this much more organic shape of the honeycomb. And what we see on the bottom is again, so what is a silkworm, a dome made by silkworms. Like silkworms are known to create the silk, and they've been doing this for hundreds of years, right? And in a process, getting, as I understand, dying in a cocoon, right? Once they make it, they die. What Oxman gave them is the framework to create the fabric, if you want, without actually dying, right, Nick?
That's correct.
They're basically building on this fabric. So what Oxman is looking at is how we humans can actually come up with the materials using experience, using technique that already exist in the natural world. Honeybees, silkworms are already making stuff, biodegradable, useful, all of these the things that we would like to build on, and how can we collaborate with them, right, to create something new and without depleting natural resources.
I read in the newspaper, actually, we don't read newspapers anymore. We read online that after the success of unionization in Starbucks, the silkworms are actually beginning to organize and look into the possibility of forming a silk union, because they work long hours. This is 24/7 work.
I think I read somewhere that she used 6,500 silkworms to create this dome that we're looking the picture of.
What kind of benefits do they want?
Well, they want the lights turned off in that huge hall there, at least for 4 hours every 24 hours, so that they can get some sleep. So what you have to imagine here is, in the image on the bottom, imagine something like a geodesic dome, like one of Buckminster Fuller's geodesic domes, in which you have the struts, the triangular struts that attach one to the other. And what Oxman and her team did is to augment those struts by putting more lines between the adjacent struts, and that gave pathways of a particular distance between those threads, in which or on which the worms can create the silk fabric.
So, and that's where the collaboration comes in. We give them some kind of structure that changes what they would naturally do to make it more useful for humans.
Yeah, that's the concept. The same with the honeybees. You know, we've been looking at honeycomb frames. When you go out into the country, you see these boxes, and there may be 6 or 8 or 10 wooden frames in there. They're always flat, and the honeycombs, the bees get to work and create the honeycombs. So if you provide as Dragana mentioned, a more organic shape or form on which the bees would create their honeycomb, you end up with something like what we saw. And I think this is more of a conceptual inspiration rather than a practical idea, but I think as a concept of looking for opportunities to collaborate, it has great value.
Absolutely.
So you said a lot of these things are like prototypes that are kind of getting us along the road to a more sustainable architecture.
Yeah, especially the big idea, the broad idea that things can come together for a short time, and then we should ask ourselves what happens at the end of their useful life? What happens to them? And if they biodegrade, that is a positive thing. And if they can be dismantled and be employed, recycled in new kinds of structures, that is also, that's extending their possible life. And that's also valuable. We should move on here, and we're not going to look at that video, but we are going to look, and Dragana is going to tell us about this.
Oh, isn't this something? I was going to say, can you guess what it is? But I think it says there.
I thought my first reaction was we're looking at some kind of really, really cool shoe.
Isn't that the case? Actually, that was my first thought when very first time I saw this. It does look like a very cool shoe, doesn't it? But actually, it's a chaise, and it is interactive chaise. So how is it interactive? What is it? What is it? First of all, it's a kind of combination of very traditional material, in this case, a wood. See the wood as the outer shell, and the 44 different materials that her team used to create this inner shell. Inner shell is really creating the nodes that reflecting a pressure points on a body. So whole idea is to create a healing chair, healing space, chair where one can sit in as a cocoon almost, and can almost isolate himself from the environment, because the chair has also acoustical properties. These rubber-like nodes that you see of different colors that you see creating the inner shell of the chair are also able to absorb sound and kind of create a warm and what she said, womb-like environment for a person to relax. And apparently the first one was made for Dalai Lama. So I think he can make himself relax even without having the shades, but I guess this was going to be a helpful tool for Dalai Lama to relax. And by the way, this shade is called Gemini, and it really is meant to have a twin. You know, Geminis are twin from mythology, and so the second one, that the twin would actually fit in and create complete enclosure, or it could be used as a separate shape. So quite an interesting idea, and I've seen pictures of Neri Oxman relaxing in the chair. Unfortunately, we were not able to sit in it. We're looking at it at the museum. It's not, we were not allowed.
So you have to check in with the Dalai Lama to find out how comfortable it is.
Apparently, it's quite comfortable, because basically it follows the contours of the body. And again, how was it made? It was made using this 3D printing technique that her team is using on all of these different prototypes that they create.
One thing I just noticed now was that this chair exemplifies two other ideas we talked about. One is the heat map, and the second is the Voronoi pattern. The heat map, we saw that wherever there is more heat, the color becomes more red.
That's right.
And in this case, this represents pressure. So right there where your butt would be if you were sitting on it, that's where most of the weight of your body is. It's right there at the where
don't remind me, Nick.
And similarly, the Voronoi pattern, these nodes or these cells or pods, however you want to call them, vary in size. And where they have to wrap around a smaller space, a tighter curvature, the blobs, the nodes become smaller. I can't say that necessarily seems to look like the stress, the tension at those points, but that would be the idea. That might explain why some of these nodes are smaller and some of them are larger.
That's right. And those two holes, I guess, are for your elbows, right?
Oh.
You kind of fit in, and the head would be in this hook, inside of this wooden shell on the top. So you kind of nestled in, cocooned in.
Shall we move on to the Gemini Theater, Dragana?
Yeah, we certainly can. So this is what we just saw was a chair, right? Now, if you take that same idea of using this rubber-like synthetic material to create this nodes that respond to pressure points in your body, you can kind of expand that. Where do we sit often? In a theater, right? In a cinema. So here, imagine creating this large space using that same concept where you would be cocooned in, I suppose on one side would be a screen, and you can lay down or in the various poses or however it fits your body the best, and have also the acoustic ability of the material to absorb and reflect the acoustics in the most advantageous way. I think that's the idea behind the cinema. Again, this is only a model, and we are not, we don't know that there is an actual attempt to do this anywhere. Yeah, this is a close-up of some of those nodes and the material surface where you would lay down.
I'm sorry I missed it. Can you repeat what these, jelly beans are made of or filled with?
It's a basically synthetic rubber-like material. She said she used 44, I have it somewhere written, 44 different composite material to 3D print the surface.
And are those recycled materials? And is that staying to our charter, or?
I would hope that that's the case, because everything she does has the sustainability behind it. It was not explicitly stated in the material that at least that I read, but I
mean, it sounds to me like it might not be recycled materials, but it would be materials that can be transformed in the future.
Or decomposed.
Yeah, like it's biodegradable, or I think they're thinking a lot more about the afterlife of these things.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question, Marcia? we'll keep
Hey,
going.
Rodney, it looks like a fish.
Yeah, it did look a lot like a fish, Paco. Very great observation. These are very intriguing shapes that we're seeing in these materials.
Well, speaking of intriguing shapes, we're going to move on here. One of the more structural and practical inventions that the Oxman team came up with were glass columns. These are 3D printed. So 3D printing is similar to extrusion, in which you have material going through a very small aperture. If you move the aperture around or have the aperture move through some kind of computer control, you can build up an object, whatever shape that the computer description specifies. In this case, it's a shape that, I don't know, I wish I had a plan view of this, but it's sort of a four-lobed object which is extended into 3D space, and it has the property that they can be stacked like that. They're smaller pieces. It looks like every piece is, maybe 12 inches, 16 inches high. They can be stacked. And not only that, they have sufficient compressive strength, that is, they can hold load in vertical direction, that they can become real columns and also function as lamps, is what we see right here, that a light source is put inside the column and illuminate a space in that way.
Yeah.
This seems like it's already, this could actually be a marketable product. I can imagine a building made with these columns and the classic glass blocks of the 1950s.
Right. And these are, they created 3D printers that are able to print these segments that you describe, about 12 to 16 inches tall. Apparently up to 33 pounds of molten glass can be used to create one of these flower-like shapes.
Mm-hmm.
I read somewhere also that the shape of the column depends really on how much load the column would take. The more intricate shape, the more load apparently it can take.
Mm-hmm.
So are these structural supports in addition to being kind of sources of light?
That's what they're saying, that these
Wow.
could be structural columns.
Wow.
We have not seen them in used yet as a structure, but
It does seem possible.
Yeah, it's possible, and they do calculate as structural columns.
And is this something the architectural world is kind of watching to see, like, you know, is this is kind of like cutting edge, but you know, looking for practical applications?
I'm sure, absolutely. It's she is on a radar now. It's not anymore esoteric thing done in a lab that nobody knows about. It's in last, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, her name is out there and what they are doing. And now actually she's in New York City. She's creating this lab, this facility, apparently 35,000 square feet facility somewhere on island of Manhattan, that they will be making some of these things. So yes, I think we will hear more.
Exciting.
Speaking of growing notoriety, Dragana, can you tell us about Mannahatta?
Oh, well, what do you think? What are you looking at? Can you guess?
It looks like flying saucers of some type.
Doesn't it?
Very futuristic thing.
Looks like a science fiction for sure, right? Well, it actually is made for science fiction movie. It apparently Francis Ford Coppola is making science fiction movie named Megalopolis. And Neri Oxman is collaborating, or she has created these flying saucers, if you want, for them to be used during the filming of the movie. So what are we looking at? we are actually, the name itself may help you. Manhattan is original name of the island of Manhattan used by the native people. An idea here is to imagine, to create the vision of this megalopolis that is changed through bioregeneration. So she is starting with Manhattan as it is right now. I don't know if next slide will show us a little closer. Well, let's say one right in front of us. So what we are looking first on the left. That is in her vision, Manhattan Island in 2100, in 2100, 80 years from now, right? It shows, you can kind of recognize the building of the Manhattan. There is that tall pencil-like skyscraper that was built recently near Central Park. But what we see in a foreground in this circle is where approximately Hunter's Yards are in Manhattan. Is this mass, is this the element that where she envisioned it, the process can be started of regenerating the natural environment in Manhattan. Apparently in 1600, before white men came to the island, Manhattan was one of the most biodiverse areas in the world. What it is now, 400 years later, we all know it's basically concrete jungle. So idea here is to imagine, can we return, help the island regenerate itself and bring it back to that pre-white man environment. And so she's proposing creating this biosphere that will slowly take over, and in stages every 100 years would take more of the space, and eventually the whole island on Manhattan would return on the very right-hand side. You can hardly see any of the buildings, right? Everything is returned to this primordial state. It's science fiction.
And you don't really have to worry about the New York Yankees anymore.
That's for sure. That's for sure. It's a kind of biomass that spreads from Hunter's Yards and kind of takes over in 400 years, kind of reversing the process that happened from 1600 till now. They apparently use the algorithms, they use all kinds of investigation to come up with this.
So we have a question from Peter and Kevin. So where are the people? Do we assume they're all dead? Like what happens to the population?
Not necessarily. We do not assume they are all dead. What she's saying, somewhere she said something like, imagination has a responsibility. So what they're looking at is relationship between humans and nature, between humans, and between humans and other species, and trying to create an environment that would accommodate all of us. So in my understanding, humans are in there somewhere. Now, don't ask me where exactly, but that was my understanding. Yes, humans are still around.
They're all at the Museum of Modern Art.
That leads to this. I thought her statement on her website was really very good. It's an evolutionary principle, really. What if there are no right answers? Only ever-shifting conditions and responses. Why I appreciate that is because this is the fact of life. This is the fact of nature, that conditions are always changing, and we have to be able to, as designers, as human beings, adapt, find new solutions, and not lock ourselves into old solutions. Hence the idea of biodegrading. is a way of clearing the deck and creating opportunities for new solutions. And I think if I got anything from the Oxman show, it was this willingness to recycle, to cast away old solutions and be inspired by nature to find new ones.
Right. But go ahead, Dragana.
I was just going to say, I don't want to finish this before I have a chance to read you. I think we found it intriguing last time, Nick, when we talked about it. Neri Oxman explaining her process and explain how they come up with all these, we may say, really wild, out there ideas. And what she's talking about is they employ Krebs cycle of creativity. What that means is, instead of dividing art, design, engineering, and science into 4 different unrelated rubrics, I created a circle between them and said, look, the input for one domain is the output for another. The input for science is information, and science converts information into knowledge. Engineering takes that knowledge and converts it into utility. And design takes utility and converts it into a product that has a cultural context. Art looks at that cultural context to question our perception of reality. From art and back to science again, the cycle continues. So this interdisciplinary the recycling of ideas is what is behind all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That's a beautiful concept. I love that.
yeah, and I think we can see like what the importance of what she's doing is. It's helping us see a way out of the difficulties we're facing today, where we're running out of natural resources. We're seeing the consequence of things like carbon emissions, and it seems pretty frightening. But she's also imagining a future in which we are able to get past that and use the knowledge to work it to our advantage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And she also challenges some very deeply embedded ideas and cultural presumptions like that of immortality, that what we do will live on for centuries. In fact, what we do, often the worst of what we do, lives on, and the best of what we do is incorporated into processes. But I don't know. It's a very dynamic picture of the world, and I think she exemplifies in the design process this sense of temporality, which I really love, and the continuation with nature, the continuity with the processes around us,
and learning from nature. And she says nature is their first client. I think that is the motto of everything she does.
I'm wondering if some others in the audience would have maybe some of you had a chance to see this exhibition, which is at San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, I think through May
15th. It's very,
So
it closes very soon.
So this Sunday, you need to get there in the next 6 days. But has anyone seen it? Does anybody have thoughts on it? I myself, I found it really intriguing. I mean, this image behind me is something you will see when you go there, and these are things you never would expect to see. Those of you who know me know that that's what I always ask from the art museum. I always want to be surprised. I always want the art museum to show me something I wasn't expecting to see, and this show certainly succeeds in doing that.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
The Silkworm Sphere, was that for real or?
Yeah.
Okay, how big was it?
I could actually, Rodney, you decide here. We've got a 3.5 minute video showing the construction of that.
I think we have time for that.
Yeah, okay, I'll put that on right now.
Make sure you share your sound, Nick, assuming it has sound.
Yeah, it does have sound. There it is, coming at you. Boom. and start.
There it is. It's about 15 feet, if I'm not mistaken, diameter. Oh,
This is something we could all do ourselves at home if we
yeah,
wanted to,
that's
right?
How are they, aren't they feed, how do they feed them and what are they feeding them?
If I know.
I don't know what they feed them. And
Mulberry leaves.
mulberry leaves. That
That's
sounds good to
very
me.
amazing, Rodney. That reminds me
Well,
about having an insect in that kind of Salesforce tower, like putting up, like like a glass too.
So, well, I'm not, Paco, you're saying an insect, what's the relationship between the insect and the Salesforce tower? I know the
Oh,
guy
like
that, go ahead.
they're putting up plastics too, and apparently they put on like thread too.
Interesting. Well, thanks for that, Nick. And any other, and thanks, Peter and Kevin, for the question. Any other thoughts on what we've been seeing and talking about? It's very, futuristic stuff. It's not just going and looking at beautiful things in the museum. It's really something getting us to think about our future and maybe giving you a dose of optimism that we will find some really novel ways to address our problems.
Neri Oxman is optimist. Everything that I read that she said, it is optimism that kind of pushes her to comes up with all these ideas and engage all these different scientists and designers to come up with more and more ideas.
Indeed.
Sarah in chat is mentioning the non-repeating geometric shape that forms the outside of the Salesforce Transit Center. So kind of an interesting idea along the same lines, that an interesting use of math, actually, in this case, to create a structure that is the shell of that building.
Like making a cylinder to Rodney.
Yes.
Really reminds.
Dragana, let me ask you. You said Neri Oxman is an optimist. Would it be true to say, like, maybe most architects have to be optimists because you're kind of trying to plan for a future that you think your buildings will be a positive part of?
Certainly, yes. But unfortunately, not all architects build really good buildings that should remain and that should be our legacy. That is a totally separate subject. But yes, in general, architects are optimists. We are looking to we are building to try to create a better environment, right? That's the behind idea of architecture and building.
Well, I'm all for that. So I'll say, Dragana and Nick, thank you very much for coming on the Art Viewing Adventures program. We'd love to have you guys back again in the future because your programs are always really interesting. I will say that in 2 weeks, we're going to be back with another one of our museum guide friends. April Angevine is going to be with us to talk about Diego Rivera. And, of course, he's got the great mural on display at SFMOMA right now, and very important part of Bay Area history. And she'll be telling us more about his role and as a Mexican muralist. And she's always great. So please come back in 2 weeks to enjoy that.
Can't wait to see Diego Rivera,
Well, if you haven't been to the Pan American Unity mural in at SFMOMA, which of course we talked about last year, I love it. Every time I go back, I always enjoy, and I'm always really engaged by it. And Nikki, I know, and I guess that kind of leads into Nikki and I are working on a program on the Presida Eyes murals of the Mission District, which will be at the end of June. So you have that to look forward to. Nikki, why don't you tell us about what's coming up next from Community Living Campaign?
Okay, sure. Yeah, thank you everybody for being here today. I wanted to tell you, Ronnie, I finally got to the Diego last weekend when they had the International Workers' Day March. I parked near the MoMA so I could march back, and I got to see that beautiful mural. And they have these really neat wooden steps where you can just sit up there like bleachers and just look at it for as long as it takes. So I recommend that, and it's a great place to take people that are visiting our beautiful city. So anyway, yeah, the things coming up. Today we're having some great stuff. We're having at 2:30 Art with Elders, 4 o'clock Chinese yoga, and then again tonight, like I said, Richie Unterberger is doing Roy Orbison from 6 to 7:30. So that's coming up. And then tomorrow happens to be, I got my little statue here, Mexican Mother's Day, Happy Dia de las Madres. And CLC is doing something in the Mission. There's going to be a tour of the Mission, a little walking tour around 21st and Cap. People are going to meet at Ruth's table and walk around and do little exercise with their cameras, using your camera phones and learning how to use them a little bit better. So that should be fun. The weather's always great down there. There's always so much to see. There's the murals, there's the people, there's the restaurants, the food. It's always an adventure in the Mission. So hopefully I'll be able to be down there as well. And then there's a lot of tech stuff that we do at CLC to support seniors and people with disabilities, because we're trying to close that digital gap. And whether we like it or not, technology is staring us in the face, and whether it comes to health, banking, talking to your lawyer, we're going to have to be on Zoom. We're going to have to be as tech savvy as you can possibly get. So if you have any friends that are seniors or people that are disabled, that are struggling with that are reluctant, tell them about the community living campaign, and they can go on our website and check out what we have to offer and where they are and what they need, whether it's learning how to use your phone better or your tablet, anything. We will probably be able to fit your need. So thank you all for being here. Thank you so much, everybody. And we'll see you in a
See you,
couple weeks.
Nikki.
Thank you,
Thank
See you,
Paco.
Paco.
I'm
Thank you,
going to be on
everybody.
vacation. I'm going to be on
Bye.
vacation when we do the Diego, but I think I'll actually pop in, even though I'm on vacation. So that'll be really fun. Yeah. Thanks, everybody. And Jennifer, thanks for the tech support.
Thanks, Jennifer, as always. Thanks,
Bye,
Nick and Dragana. See you guys
Thank
soon.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank you
Peter.
very
Bye,
much.
Shannon. Bye, Roger.
Bye, Roger. Bye,
Bye.
Nikki.
Go Giants.
See you.
Happy Mother's Day tomorrow.
Oh no, yesterday was Mother's Day.
The Mexican Mother's Day is always May 10th.
Really?
So,
Happy Mother's Day in
Oh.
Mexico too.
oh, you're so nice. Thank you. When is it in the Philippines? Is it?
Yesterday.
It was
And
yesterday.
Yesterday was an election day.
Oh,
Philippines.
wow. Oh, wow.
President.
That's exciting. Wow. Okay. Thank you for letting us know. Bye,
Bye,
everybody.
Nikki.
Bye. And Jennifer, I'll wait for you to sign us off.
No, don't sign you off. I'm
Oh.
I'm here. So the next class is starting earlier now.
Oh,
So you guys can just leave.
okay. What time officially then you guys come on?
2:15 now.
Oh, I think that's the same. I think there's always, maybe you know this. For
No,
sure.
it was 2:30, but yeah, it's changed because it might have been earlier before, but now it's an hour and a half.
Oh,
So that's why, yeah, it keeps changing.
okay. 'Cause I always think there's a 15-minute leeway for each program before and after.
Yeah, there is, except in this case.
Okay, you actually start at 2:15.
Yeah,
Oh, okay. Well, I'll let you go. Thank you. Bye.
no
Maya.
problem.
Okay.
Bye, Nikki.
Bye.
See
Bye,
you.
Paco's staying, I
Bye.
know.